One of the best compliments I've gotten so far in the animation industry is that I'm what you can consider a Swiss Army artist, which means I can actually hold myself pretty well in any kind of task that I'm required to do. As a VizDev artist, I've mainly done environments, props, color keys, layouts, etc. But I've never really been known for doing characters. Just recently I picked up on this and I added some character work to my latest VizDev project. But it took me a while to be proud of that. It is something that always interested me. I actually started my journey in art wanting to be a character designer, but I struggled heavily with it. I could never really find a proper style for drawing or painting people, and this is something that I was very determined to change. I really wanted to improve on it, and as we all know, the only way to really improve at your art is to do it constantly. I've been practicing quite a bit lately and trying to get out of my comfort zone, and that's why today I want to talk about the things I've learned so far while painting the human form. Just a bit of a disclaimer, I wouldn't really take this as a tutorial. You may or may not agree with the workflow and advice I'm gonna give, and that's totally fine. Personally, I think that watching someone do art helps much more than the verbal advice, so I hope the speed painting clips are useful, and if not, then at the very least I hope they're entertaining. Keep it rough and just paint. I'm an incredibly impatient person, and when it comes to my art, I want to know that what I'm doing is going somewhere. Unlike environments, painting the human form for me had a different workflow. Let me explain. When painting, let's say, a room, I block in everything. I lasso tool my shapes, I keep it sort of clean from the start, I know where my light source is going to be, and that determines how the shadows are going to look. Then it's just a matter of figuring out the colors and values, etc. I have layers for this, and I'm confident that I can change anything specific that I want. But when it comes to people, I realize I really can't expect it to be like that, because the way that I add stuff will heavily affect how my character looks on design and expression. Perhaps that's just how my brain works, but to me they are very different workflows. I kept telling to myself to just shut up and paint. If I was taking it slow and trying to be too clean, that proved to just not work for me. It just kept slowing me down. So I needed to keep it rough, and this is something that I still have to get comfortable with. This is where you have to really trust the process. I know some people might heavily relate to this, but sometimes your biggest issue while doing art is overthinking, not having your thoughts clear, not knowing where to go. And unfortunately, that's not just an artistic skill that you can acquire out of nowhere. I guess I was very used to having my pieces look clean from the start, so this was very interesting to try. I know that most people who, for example, have a background with traditional painting are very mad at me right now because I'm complaining about a process that they've known since the start. So, I mean, yeah, I admire you for that. I always wonder, how do people manage to get their paintings look so painterly? And as stupid as the answer might be, it turns out that comes organically with the painting process. The brush actually doesn't matter. As I said before, I always wonder how some people got such a painterly look to their pieces and thought it had to be the brushes that they were using. However, I found myself using the same round brush with active opacity for the sketch, the rendering, and basically the entire process. When painting humans, or well, anything, you're basically sculpting, working from bigger to smaller, and no fancy brush will make that process easier. As a matter of fact, some brushes might even worsen your workflow. For the illustrations that I have been showing, I used mainly 3 brushes, but as I said, I found myself only using one sometimes. This square grainy brush with opacity activated, your typical round airbrush that I would mainly use for adding color on a multiply or overlay layer, and lastly this circular soft brush with opacity activated. What really matters is your knowledge on anatomy and understanding of shapes, and that is something that simply comes with practice. It's always important to keep some sort of anatomy reference when you're working on this kind of stuff. For example, I use the app Art Anatomy that allows me to pull up a 3D model of a skull that I use while drawing my sketch, just to keep in mind the landmarks and proportions. And I also use this other app called Head Model Studio that allows me to set up the lighting that I want to paint and how it will affect the basic planes of the face. The wrong colors will f up everything. Now bear with me because I'll try to explain this as best as I can. If the painting looks wrong but the sketch is fine, it has to be the colors, and this is something that has happened to me multiple times. I keep wondering, why does it look wrong if I'm technically following the procedure, if I technically know how the anatomy works, if technically the sketch is proportionally correct. The face is probably one of the most difficult things to paint, at least for me, due to how many plane changes it has, as well as hard and soft edges. On top of that, the skin color changes based on where are we talking about, on the cheeks, on the nose, on the forehead, but it's also affected by shadows and light. What was messing up my color choices at first was trying to go too crazy with the values and the hues. What I really had to do was to keep them local, keep them close, and then build up from that. I basically nailed it down to just build up from the skin color to the skin shadow, then hue variations on the certain landmarks, and then work with that to shape the rest. A key mistake I did at first was using dark values too soon, like I tend to do with my environment work. I love contrast a lot, dark shadows, all that, but defining the human form properly, as I said, requires a lot more precise work. Using dark values too soon can heavily alter how the piece looks and mess with the structure. I realize that this is something that I do pretty often to make my life easier. I select colors that are very unsaturated and local to each other in terms of hue. And even this can make the piece look uninteresting or dull at first. Those are things that can always be pushed a little bit later, at the end, with extra layers. And speaking about that, less layers is actually better. I'm used to working with more than 200 or 300 layers for my usual environment work, having everything on a separate layer, even the smallest things. I always did this so that I could change colors or values quickly without altering anything else, but I realized that's a disadvantage when it comes to painting humans. I started having one eye and the lips and the hair and the nose on separate layers. Once again, trying to keep things too clean. I'm glad I was able to get out of that comfort zone and just use 2 or 3 extra layers for help, then merge and work on top of everything else. If you're someone like me who's used to working with multiple layers, more specifically layer modes, like for example multiply, overlay, hard light, color dodge, etc., then you'll know that what those layers do is they will very much change the colors that you have underneath, and then you will have some sort of layer on top of layer on top of layer that if you remove, then you don't really know what the color is, what the actual color is. You will always have a variation of it. When painting this way, by merging everything, the colors that you have are what they are, and you have to work with that and keep going with that. And this allows me to know when something is wrong or when something can be pushed. Lastly, those edges. The one thing that I have realized differentiates one good painting from a mediocre one is how you play with hard, soft edges. As an environment artist, you're mainly dealing with hard edges all the time. You're painting walls, floors, etc. But the human form is a combination of hard and soft edges and whatever it is in between. You truly need to treat it with such delicacy, because when something doesn't look right, when one edge is too hard or too soft, it can completely alter how your whole piece looks. It can make your anatomy completely wrong and flat, and that is something that we truly want to avoid: flatness. Here is where you have to apply the #1 rule that every artist knows, and that is breaking down everything in simple shapes. Those circles, triangles, and cylinders you painted while learning fundamentals come really handy right now. I've realized the best option is not to keep blending constantly every single brushstroke that you add, but to actually place in a big soft shape and then carve in the hard details, or vice versa. Then color pick whatever tone you have in the middle of that and use that to keep sculpting, always working from less to more. Always having less tones first and then adding more gradually. I've realized this is where I spend most of my time with, trying to get this right, because as I said, if one edge is too hard or if one edge is too soft, then it simply doesn't work. It's always a matter of having that solid foundation, which is usually simple shapes, simple colors, and then you can gradually start incrementing your detail. Always keep in mind percentages, just like we would do, for example, in environments with composition. Having, let's say, 60% shadows, and then 30% light, and then 10% of highlights. That is very useful, especially when it comes to tones with values, because that is going to make your piece look a little bit more solidified. That is going to make it understandable from the ground. And this, of course, wouldn't be anything unless you know the anatomy, unless you know what bone is supposed to go there, what muscle is supposed to go there, so that you can know where those hard edges and where those soft edges are. If all this sounds complicated, yeah, that's exactly the reason why I never adventured myself into the human form. I don't know how character designers do this so naturally. But I actually feel very proud of myself and how much I've accomplished with such little practice, you could say. I truly feel like I have improved a lot, because what the is this? I don't even know what the hell is going in here. Like, this is something that I tried doing in February or March of this year, so it's only been a couple months. Anyway, one thing's for sure, and that is, it doesn't matter what kind of artist you are or what kind of specialization do you have. I don't even know if I say that right. What kind of priority you have in art, painting anatomy, painting bodies, painting portraits, it's always very helpful, and I consider this is something that all artists should do every now and then. Thank you very much if you made it to this part of the video. I have included my socials in the description if you want to check them out. See you on the next one.